Hello and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Robyn Smyers, and I'm a member of the City Club's Board of Directors. I'm also here today as a member of the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association. I see many fellow members of the bar in the audience, and we thank each and every one of you in attendance or listening today for your support. For 55 years now in the United States, we've taken the beginning of May as an opportunity to celebrate Law Day and to reflect upon the importance of law in protecting civil and human rights and promoting justice and a healthy civil society. As we were sadly reminded by the Boston Massacre bombing, the Newtown Massacre, the indictment last year of 5 anarchists in Cleveland for attempting to blow up a bridge, and recent human trafficking arrests, we live in a complex world. Law enforcement and our justice system face unprecedented challenges. And so, with that in mind, it's an honor to introduce to you today the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Steve Dettelbach. Mr. Dettelbach will speak with us today regarding challenges facing law enforcement, national security, firearms, and human trafficking. Mr. Dettelbach is a career federal prosecutor. In his earlier years with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, he was the national coordinator of the involuntary servitude human trafficking cases. In that capacity, he prosecuted what was at the time the largest human trafficking case in U.S. history, involving some 70 women from Thailand held against their will in El Monte, California. And he continues that work here in Ohio, where investigations in recent years have found an alarming amount of human trafficking in our cities. Mr. Dettelbach has remained committed to civil rights throughout his career, and he's created a dedicated civil rights unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Cleveland. He also chairs the Civil Rights Subcommittee of U.S. Attorneys that advises Attorney General Eric Holder. These are just a few of the areas of law overseen by Mr. Dettelbach's office. His office also is responsible for dealing with crimes relating to national security, drug trafficking, and firearms. Mr. Dettelbach's work is a natural extension of his commitment to community. It is not uncommon to run into him in a church basement or a community center, speaking to groups of citizens, or sometimes just supporting their efforts with his presence. And that's no wonder. That sort of commitment is common to lifelong Clevelanders like Mr. Dettelbach, whose father, uncle, and wife are with us here today. We're so glad all of you could join us. And now it's my honor to present to you the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Steve Dettelbach.
I do want to thank you very, very much, Robyn, for that kind introduction, and thank all of you for coming here. I especially want to say thank you to my lovely wife, Carol Bialostowski, who is here. Although I do have to tell you that when I told her I was speaking here, and I, of course, speaking at the City Club is an honor, her first question was, how much does it cost again? I want to also say a special word of salute to Jim Foster. As his time at the City Club as executive director has wound down. You know, we talk a lot about public service in our community, Jim, but the job that you have done in making the City Club even stronger as a national citadel of free speech means that you have truly been a treasure to our community. I don't think there's enough that we can say to thank you for that. Dan, congratulations. You have some very, very big shoes to fill. It's a great honor to be here on Law Day. Abraham Lincoln has given some of the greatest speeches ever given by a trial lawyer. And sadly for you and me both, that's not going to be changing today. But on the subject of the law, a subject that was near and dear to our 16th president's heart, Lincoln said, and I quote, "Law is nothing else but the best reason of wise men applied for ages to the transaction and business of mankind." For Lincoln, The law was not just wisdom. It was wisdom, but not just wisdom. It was wisdom that was applied to our daily lives to make our lives better. And it seems to me that this is a key message of the American legal system. Here, our law cannot just be words in some book or some papers stuck under some glass in a museum. Here, our law must also be a reflection of the greatest and wisest aspirations we have as citizens. Here, the law, and most specifically the rule of law, must continue to work as the great equalizer in this great democratic experiment. It must guide us and help us to be, as a society, the people that we want to be, even while we recognize that sometimes the people that we actually are doesn't quite match up with who we want to be quite yet. In other words, for the law to really work for us, I think it has to work on us a little bit every day. I know that was the way I was always taught about the law when I was growing up. My dad, who is here, was a trial lawyer, and when I was a kid, he taught me by word and by example that the law could protect the rights of the most vulnerable, even against the most powerful. And he taught me that lawyers had a special duty to the rule of law, even beyond that of ordinary citizens. We were sort of keepers of the flame that might be able, occasionally, to light the way to solve some of our society's more difficult problems. And I'm here today to tell you that I think that my dad and President Lincoln were both right, although maybe not in that order. And not only to tell you that, but to prove it by talking about some pressing and concrete examples that I see in our midst right now. Situations and issues about which the law can offer us the promise of becoming the best people we can be, where it can help us to transform and improve our community and our society, really through people like you, to make lives better. And nowhere is there more work to be done than when it comes to the tragedies imposed by the scourge of human trafficking. And perhaps that is why the American Bar Association and the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, under President Strang's leadership and Executive Director David Watson, who's here, are leading the way by declaring that this year should be one of the central themes of Law Day nationally. And I wholeheartedly commend you for that effort. It is important. And as a side note, we also have John Lyken, who's the incoming bar president here. And John, I know that you are going to, Carter has had a lot of community events, as he said, and Carol was part of that. He has really reached out in the community. I know that you're going to have this year's annual event, not in a community center, but on the floor of the Q. And I am hoping that you can draw some people there. Human trafficking, though, is not new. The name is new, okay? But the concept of forced labor is sadly as old as inhumanity. And our nation, tragically and honestly, has often strayed far from our ideals on this particular subject. In fact, as you know, for 100 years or so, until the time of President Lincoln, slavery was the law of this land. It was ensconced in our great Constitution. Then, even after we fought a war and hundreds of thousands died to change the legal regime of slavery, the reality is that for many years and up until now, we don't oftentimes live up to that legal aspiration in our daily lives. Whether it was called human trafficking or slavery or involuntary servitude or debt bondage, the concept has basically remained the same. The powerful or the rich have continued to prey upon the powerless, not only by taking their property and sometimes attacking them, but literally by robbing them of their free will and coercing physical labor from them. And this crime, I will tell you, has an awful scarring effect on a person. Because predators do not only aim to take away what you have, what you can hold, property, but they take away a person's human dignity. I saw this firsthand because, as Robyn said, I started my career almost by accident prosecuting a series of human trafficking, what we called then involuntary servitude cases all over the United States. And in fact, as Robyn mentioned, in 1996, I prosecuted what was at that time the largest human trafficking case in the country, and it was in a suburb of LA, bedroom community, El Monte, California. In that case, there were about 70 Thai women who the defendants forced into a little townhouse compound on a normal street, and they were literally subhuman conditions there. Inside the apartments, you would go in and you'd see, a small bedroll that would be next to a little stand with a sewing machine, and that was their living space. It was probably about 6 feet by 6 feet both ways. And they were forced, these women, to sew and make clothes all day and all night, 22-hour days, 21-hour days, for no pay. And they were constantly threatened, exploited in every way, and, as you said, Robyn, basically held prisoners. And this didn't go on for days, this didn't go on for months, this went on for years. I have a lot of memories of that case. Of course, the legal memories about how we were able to get the defendants convicted and send them to jail for a long time, and memories about the victims, how these 70 women in later years were all able to become naturalized citizens of the United States and lead wonderful lives here. But a memory that stays with me and bothers me more than most on this case is how all this happened in a seemingly normal community, in a neighborhood. Later, as we were investigating the case after we had come in and the agents had rescued these women, we would go back and in a non-threatening way, the way investigators do, talk to some of the neighbors. And we'd ask questions like, well, I know, now you didn't know this then. But looking back on it, did it strike you as odd, perhaps, that these 70 women who lived next door to you never left their home? Did it strike you as odd that the barbed wire fences that they put up were angled inwards as if to keep people from leaving as opposed to outwards to keep burglars out? Did it strike you as odd that during daylight hours in the low crime area there were these men kind of walking around the compound patrolling? The truth of the matter is that slavery was all around these neighbors. And the neighbors either didn't notice or, quite frankly, honestly, didn't want to notice. The law was there, but the will to live up to the aspirations of the law was not. And this modern-day slavery is still all around us, and not just in California. It hides in plain sight also in our community. It's down the street at a coffee shop. It's at that hotel you drive by up the freeway exit where you are. It's in your neighborhood nail parlor and some of the farms you drive by as you use our interstates. Whether it is labor exploitation or underage girls literally being raped for money, this conduct is still in our midst. It's in downtown Cleveland. It's in Willoughby Hills. It's in North Olmsted. It's in Mentor. And that's not conjecture or me picking on particular cities. That's telling you the places where we discovered some of this conduct in cases we have already prosecuted. And the damage inflicted by these cases goes far, far beyond the law. There is a huge human toll. And when our law enforcement partners at the FBI, who leads this task force incredibly, or the Cleveland Police Department or the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Department, when they find these young girls, and they often are young girls, and when we indict these cases and get long prison sentences and send these bad people to jail, the legal process is over, but the road to recovery for the victims is just begun, and oftentimes it's a very difficult road. And that is why, in addition to the law, in addition to the law enforcement community, I think it's important that we be proud of the work done by nonprofit agencies on this question. And some of those people are here today. People like the Coalition to End Human Trafficking, organizations like the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, Belfair, the Salvation Army, and so many others who pick up these broken lives and through giving counseling and housing and try to get the people back in school and then more counseling, again, stick with these victims to try to put their lives back together. These organizations do a lot of work. and they do a lot of work out of the spotlight without a lot of glamour, and it's difficult work, and we all owe these people a deep debt of thanks in our community. The fight to end human trafficking is a fight for the civil and human rights of the most vulnerable in our community and in our country. And it is a fight that relies on our commitment to use the law, as Dr. King so famously said, bend the arc of history towards justice. It is a real-world example in our community of the law shining a light on situations that are often too horrific for us to even imagine, and hoping that through shining that light over time, we can someday live up to the aspirations of the law. There's another area of problems that we face where we as a society must also, I believe, use the law, better use the rule of law to protect the collective values of our community. And that is the issue of firearms violence. I'm here to tell you that we are beset with a plague of gun violence all across our nation and right here in our community. The shootings last year at Chardon High School demonstrate, like the shootings in Newtown, Connecticut, Aurora, Colorado, and even Case Western Reserve University a few years ago, that no one is immune from this problem. No city, no region, no group is immune from this disease. Now, because those shootings that I just mentioned are so horrific and so dramatic, they receive extra attention. They touch us, as they should. But the reality is, as most of you know, there is a steady and nearly constant torrent of gun violence all around us. It is so loud, it is so omnipresent that we are tempted to ignore it, like those people in El Monte were tempted to ignore what was going on right next to them. But we cannot. And I'll give you some of the hard numbers that demonstrate why we cannot. Here are some statistics. Going back to 2006, here in the city of Cleveland, where we are sitting, about 700 people each year are shot. 700 people each year. This year alone, up until now, we're just at the beginning of May, 192 people in the city of Cleveland alone have been shot, and another 468 have been robbed at gunpoint. This doesn't just victimize and present a risk to the people who are actually looking down the barrel of the gun as victims. It is a huge risk to the law enforcement community. Last year, Cleveland police officers dealt with 3,600 incidents where a firearm was involved. That means that as a statistical matter, a Cleveland police officer each year is likely to have to deal not just once, but multiple different times with incidents where somebody else has a gun, usually a perp, by the way, has a gun. The days of hearing these stories that a normal police officer might have to go his whole career without drawing his service weapon, sadly, those days are in our past because of the plague of gun violence in our community. And that, for law enforcement, is simply an unconscionable risk. As is this an unconscionable risk. Last year, there were 99 homicides in this city, most people being killed with a firearm. Think about that, 99 in 1 year in the city of Cleveland alone. That's almost 4 new towns every year in our city. I am here to tell you, as if you don't already know, that there is a tragedy that is occurring in our community every single day because of this firearms violence. And those who are shot or killed are not the only victims. The community is victimized. That elderly couple in Glenville who's afraid to sit on their porch, their own home, that they saved their whole lives for, they're victims. The woman in Mount Pleasant who won't walk down the street because she's nervous about the guys in the corner, she's a victim. The young mother in Collinwood who won't take her kid to the park because she's scared of gun violence, she's a victim. They're all victims of gun violence. And for those of us or you who have a feeling of security because you think that you don't live in a place that's quite as dangerous. I'm here to tell you that is a false sense of security. Not only is your physical security at risk, but your community, our community's economic security is being threatened by this wave of gun violence as well. We have simply got to end the mentality that allows someone in our community, somebody maybe in this room, to think that as long as they can walk safely every day from their parking spot to the reception desk of where they work, that gun violence is really somebody else's problem. As our community and as our nation compete in a race in the global marketplace for new businesses, and as we compete for new jobs, we all suffer as a community from the self-inflicted wounds that gun violence wreaks on our ability to run that race. And just to set the record straight, the law enforcement community is doing everything it can reasonably do to address this issue. The career law enforcement people that I have seen working, the people in my office, the prosecutors, the police officers, the agents at the ATF and the FBI, working together in this city, in other cities, have been working days, nights, weekends. I see the emails at all hours on this issue. We've worked with the Cleveland police to try and prosecute violent felons who have guns, people who everybody agrees shouldn't be allowed to possess firearms. Last year, almost 1 in every 5 federal cases brought in this district involved the illegal possession or use of firearms. Just a couple of weeks ago, I went down to little old Warren, Ohio, about an hour from here, when the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, took down an undercover operation where they arrested almost 100 violent felons and drug dealers, many with firearms, and took over 160 unlawfully obtained or possessed guns off the street. And these are from convicted robbers, drug dealers, arsonists, wife beaters, you name it. And I'm sitting there giving the press conference, and the ATF had brought out some of the things they had seized, not all the weapons, but some of them. And I'm here to tell you, these are not .22s or hunting rifles. Okay? The only time you see weapons like this in a movie. Okay? And I'm giving the press conference, and I'm trying not to pay attention to the hardware that's on the table in front of me. It's very hard. These are literally weapons that we are asking our police officers and our community members to face down every day. So I'm going to be clear so that everybody understands at least what I think. These dedicated career law enforcement people and prosecutors are working around the clock using every statute at their disposal. In other words, they are busy days, nights, all the time enforcing the laws that are on the books. But the reality is that we just cannot keep up. Because not only are we outgunned by criminals on the streets, but we have now been legally disarmed by a system that looks the other way. And when even the most basic common sense measures aimed at checking firearm violence are out there, they are eroded, they are removed, and they are rejected. And what is left is a Swiss cheese regulatory scheme where a virtually unregulated flow of guns is easily available for violent criminals and drug dealers. And our cases bear this out. I'll give you an example. In December, in this district, we invited a man. He literally had an arsenal of weapons, a literal arsenal. It wasn't just a lot of weapons. He had it arranged as an arsenal. 40,000 rounds of ammunition, 18 guns, 3 assault weapons, a bulletproof vest, and, oh, best of all, he kept the arsenal in a mall, shopping mall, in Bowling Green, Ohio. And this person, he wasn't just a law-abiding citizen. He had served several years in state prison because he has a homicide conviction. He had shot 3 people, and one of the 3 had died. And this person, this convicted homicide defendant with all the guns, the public record also has shown that he was keeping a list and targeting the movements of local Jewish and African American civil rights leaders in Detroit and Northwest Ohio. And yet, with all that, he was still able to obtain not one gun, not two guns, not three, not four, not five, not six, not seven, not eight, not nine, not 10, 18 firearms and 40,000 rounds of ammunition. And the scariest thing is, I'm your chief federal law enforcement officer in this district, and I can't tell you how he got that arsenal. It's not that, by the way, not that I won't tell you, I can't tell you. With the tools we have, I don't know which holes in the Swiss cheese he was able to cram 40,000 rounds of ammunition and a bulletproof vest and extended magazines and 3 assault weapons through. We don't have the tools to stop it or to figure it out. That's a problem. Our law and our legal system can do better, and we have to try. Look, I don't have any illusions. I'm a prosecutor. I'm a pretty cynical person. I don't believe that we're going to pass a law that is going to eliminate gun violence. I know that bad guys are always going to try to find ways around the legal system, and that simply outlawing a certain behavior will never eradicate it. And I will tell you, I fully agree that we can and we must respect the legitimate rights of law-abiding citizens under the Second Amendment. But for the life of me, I cannot understand opposition to a universal background check, which the Senate filibustered last month. The criticisms, I guess, that it would establish some sort of a national gun registry is just not correct. In fact, it's outlawed in the bill. It would simply require somebody buying a firearm at a gun show or over the internet to go through the same background check as hunters do when they buy weapons at sporting goods store and have for years. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you're not going to pass a background check and you have a choice between either going somewhere where they're going to run your background and going somewhere where you don't, where are you going to go? And that's why, of course, the vast majority of firearms dealers, the vast majority of gun owners, the vast majority of NRA members support these background checks. And yet, we have not yet been able to get it done. But we simply cannot ignore this crisis, and we cannot stop trying. Because this kind of tool would give us another way that the law would help our community. It would be a way that we could use that law as an aspiration to help us protect our community and live up to the ideals that we hold dear, the ideals that families ought to be safe where they live and walking down the streets. As has been the case in so many points in our nation's past, the law, it can't fix everything. But the law can and must lead the way to building the society we all want. I got back this morning, actually, from Washington, where I was at the Department of Justice, and we talked, we had a series of budget meetings. And so I was hoping there was something that was a little stronger in the picture. But I do want to say something else about how this relates to the rule of law. I think that our community ought to really pay attention to this issue because we are making a huge mistake, I believe, if we think that indiscriminate across-the-board cuts to people and services that deliver to you the rule of law we so treasure doesn't risk tragic consequences for us, and more than that, doesn't say something about who we are. I came to see, I think at a prior Law Day event, but certainly at this podium, Senator Brown speak. And Senator Brown said, that what he tells people is, don't tell me what you think. Show me what you've done and I'll tell you what you think. And I think that that's a lesson that we ought to take to heart when we deal with these issues. Budgets are moral documents. They speak what we care about louder than words. And I ask myself, how can people in our community, in our country, be glued to their television sets looking at the tremendous work that the FBI and the Boston Police and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston did in the last weeks, and not understand that at the very same time we are about to impose very significant cuts aimed at those same agents? How can people be against the scourge of human trafficking? How can people be in favor of civil rights enforcement? How can people be against gun violence and want us to enforce gun laws? How can people rage against the outrage of public corruption? We have Ann Rowland here. We know about that here. How can people be scared by billion-dollar drug cartels and not understand that those are the people that are being benefited by these cuts and proposed cuts? And how, as lawyers, and many of us here are lawyers, can we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Gideon versus Wainwright, and at the same time stand by while massive cuts to the lawyers and to the courts that are the guardians of our civil liberties and freedoms happen on our watch? I tell you again, these budgets are moral documents, and it is our role and job as citizens to make sure they reflect the morals of our community. There is in my conference room and in the Attorney General's conference room, although his is original and mine isn't, a portrait of Robert Kennedy, a tragic victim of gun violence himself. Attorney General Kennedy deeply understood that the law could be used to summon our better angels. And he gave one of the most renowned speeches 45 years ago in the history of this city club, the day after Martin Luther King himself was a victim of gun violence. Attorney General Kennedy once said, "All of us might wish at times we lived in a more tranquil world, but we don't. And if our times are difficult and perplexing, so are they challenging and filled with opportunity." Challenging and filled with opportunity. On this law day, although we still face difficult issues, we in this room need to rededicate ourselves to the bedrock principles that the law represents. We must all dedicate ourselves to using the law as a constructive tool to help the least among us, to help heal our great nation, and help make our wonderful community the best it can be. Thanks.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are listening to the Friday Forum featuring U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, Steve Dettelbach. We will return momentarily for the traditional City Club question and answer period after a few announcements. We encourage you to formulate questions for our speaker now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. We welcome guests today at tables hosted by Baker Hostetler, Browse McDowell, Citizens for Michael Wager, the Lubrizol Corporation Legal Division, and Squire Saunders. Thank you for your support. Today's forum is the annual forum on the American justice system, and it's made possible by a generous gift to the City Club Endowment in memory of Samuel Glassman. We're also pleased to welcome students here today as part of the City Club student program. Today's student attendance is made possible by a gift from the Jeffrey David Epstein Student Memorial Fund. Joining us today are students from Shaw High School. Will the students please stand to be recognized? Now we return to Steve Dettelbach for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from members and guests alike. Holding the microphone today are Development Associate Michael Grimaldi and Program Director Carrie Miller. First question, please.
Mr. Dettelbach, thank you for coming and thank you for your terrific comments. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about an issue that you didn't include. You talked a little about handguns, but there was another piece that was dropped out of gun reform that I can't understand for the life of me why, and that is the idea of taggants, the idea of chemical additives to munitions so we could figure out where they came from. Where you can figure out where broccoli or beef that's tainted and pulled from our shelves come from, and why can't we do that for munitions? I wonder what you could tell me about that, what that might mean as a law enforcement tool if you had something like that.
So first of all, I have to confess that I'm not familiar with the specific provision that you're referring to. I am familiar more generally with the idea of gun manufacturers increasing ability to use technology to help law enforcement. And my view is that we ought to, and gun manufacturers ought to be thinking in more creative ways about how it is that they can use technology to help law enforcement to solve crimes. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about everybody's on the same page on this, I assume, which is when a gun is used in a crime, nobody has a problem in trying to figure out a way to make it easier to figure out who fired the gun. And what we're balancing is we don't want to create a system where we're infringing on the rights of innocent people who want to exercise their Second Amendment rights doing that. If there are technological fixes that enable us to better balance those things, I think it's a good thing we should pursue.
Steve, you spoke very eloquently about the firearm violence and the tremendous cost that it incurs to all parts of the American society. And you also referred to the efforts of Congress to make some minor changes in the gun laws. Of course, those were defeated by this filibuster, which was engaged in by the National Rifle Association and its very powerful allies. What do you suggest can be done by ordinary citizens, by lawyers particularly, to try to overcome the power that the NRA has?
Well, I'm not a... Look, I don't know who... I know that the bill was filibustered. I don't work on the Hill, so I'm not quite sure how it happened. I can tell you that the majority of senators voted for it, and that most public opinion polling shows that a majority of the American people believe in it. And I think what the president said the day after the vote, I think, are words that we ought to take to heart, which is this is something that the majority of Americans think that this is a good idea, that the will of the people must be made to work, and that people, the history of almost any issue, and this issue, is that small minorities of organized and motivated people stick with something, and larger majorities of people kind of come in and out of issues, right? They get excited about something, they get passionate about something, and the next thing happens, whether it's Boston or whatever it might be, and the enthusiasm fades. And I think that it's really incumbent on whatever the views of the majority of people are, if you feel passionately about something, you have to stay with it. These changes don't happen overnight. I talked about involuntary servitude. Changes don't happen overnight. And people have to stick with it and keep trying if they really care about it.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. The relationship between the Cleveland Police Department and the African American community is on very shaky ground. So much that when I was teaching, my students would say to me they didn't feel safe going up to a police officer for help. And as a result of this recent case of 137 shots being fired at 2 unarmed citizens, they were subsequently killed. I read that the Department of Justice is going to be coming in and investigating that case. So my question is, how are you going to make sure that the voices of the community are heard and do not become overshadowed by the police department?
So let me just clarify a bit, which is that the case involving the shooting in East Cleveland on November 29th, the current status of that is that it is pending before the county prosecutor, and the county prosecutor is presenting it and making decisions about how that will be handled. So I'm not going to comment on a specific case that's before a different office. The Department of Justice, my office in the Civil Rights Division, announced that we were conducting not an investigation of any one incident, but of whether or not there was a pattern and practice on the part of the Cleveland Division of Police of engaging in excessive force. And we were invited to do that by our mayor and police chief, who stood side by side with us when we announced the investigation. So as part of that investigation, and Mike Tobin, our head of community outreach, is here, we are engaging the community in accepting information from any person who wishes to be heard, and in a variety of different ways. There is an email address set up that is specifically dedicated to this case. There is a phone number set up that is specifically dedicated to this case. And we are having outreach events in all different shapes and sizes regarding this case. And with anybody who wants to talk to us, whether they have something good to say about the police or something that they want to share that's not so good about an encounter they've had with the police. So we've had private meetings with people. On Monday night, we held a community meeting at a church with about 100 people who came. We have met with people who are law enforcement officers. We have met with people who are citizens. We have met with community leaders. We will go on ride-alongs with officers. Carol Rendon, who is one of the lawyers heading that investigation, is here today. And I have personally, I think, been to 6 outreach events just in the past month on this. So I think an important piece of this, not the whole thing, but an important piece of this is engaging the community so that people understand that we're accepting information from all fronts. If I had the phone number, I'd give it out now because I have a TV camera. But I'm pretty sure that people can figure out how to get in touch with us.
Hi. Thank you so much for your comments. I want to talk about a different subject. The Boston bomber is a naturalized American citizen. And I don't know, and I hope you can tell us, if naturalized citizens have to swear an oath to uphold our laws and to defend and protect our country when they become citizens of our United States. Is it possible that those who come to our country, and there are many, they rip off Medicare and all kinds of things, frauds in different manners, can they be prosecuted for those crimes, and then can they lose their citizenship and be deported for not having upheld the laws of our country?
Our country is and always will be and always has been a proud nation of immigrants. My family and my wife is an immigrant to this country and a naturalized citizen. My children owe their lives to our ability for people to come here from abroad and live the American dream. Most data out there tends to indicate that crime problems are not in any significantly more or less degree driven by immigrants than native-born American citizens. And I'm not even just limiting it to naturalized citizens. I'm talking about even people who are here who are undocumented. I don't think a wise expenditure of our limited crime-fighting resources is to focus on a population when there's not statistical evidence to indicate that the population has any greater chance of committing a crime than I do. In answer to your question about denaturalizing citizens, yes, we can denaturalize citizens. And our office, in conjunction with the Department of Justice, engaged in a lengthy effort to denaturalize John Demjanjuk, rightfully so. And Carol Rendon, again, was one of the prosecutors on that as well, because he had lied in coming to this country about his background as a guard at a death camp where 48,000 people had been killed. But I think if you hear the facts of that case, you'll understand that those are the kinds of situations where we are talking about denaturalizing citizens, where they have done something beforehand that is so severe that it causes them to falsify and defraud the immigration authorities. So in answer to your question, we can, but it's usually limited to the kinds of situations involving people like John Demjanjuk.
Thank you so much for your comments. I have a question for you, which I'm beginning to think is a little unfair, but I'm going to ask it anyways.
Get in line.
Get in line. Okay. My question is about, I'll call it the tipping point. Your experiences are much broader. I'm very narrow. Several months ago, I attended a Stop Gun Violence little group with speakers, and I offered to ask for donations for buttons that said Stop Gun Violence, Ohioans Against Getting Shot, and Imagine a World Without Violence. I sold many the first month. I've had 8 buttons left for weeks now. Even though Connecticut happened, I still have 8 buttons left. I don't know how to generate. The people say, oh, yes, I'm interested, but not enough to do anything.
You're doing okay, actually.
What's the tipping point in getting, I'm not saying everybody in this room to do it, but if you're interested and support stopping gun violence, why not? I wear signs for everything that I care about, so you see my car, you know where I am.
Look, I think part of the secret is people becoming engaged and staying engaged, as I said before, and part of the secret is looking for consensus. I do believe what I said before. I don't think this has to be a divisive issue. I think the vast majority of gun owners and Second Amendment advocates and federal firearms licensees, can find common ground with the broader community. Nobody wants to take away guns from law-abiding citizens. It's just not what we're about. This notion that a very small group of people is kind of ginning up, that if you do any kind of reform whatsoever, that people are going to be running around and taking, guns away. I don't even know where it comes from. So I think part of it is staying engaged, but part of it is also continuing to say those things to people to assure them that, we do want to build consensus. We do want to work as a whole country, as a community, to solve some of these problems, even, by the way, if it means that everybody doesn't get every little thing that they want. Right? I think that's, in some ways, the lesson of sort of recent elections in our country, is that people, do have a deep-seated desire to be one as a community and to come together. And I think this issue, is an example of that, I hope, will be an example of that.
Mr. Dettelbach, thank you so much for your tireless work to end human trafficking. You have an audience today filled with attorneys, many of us being private practicing attorneys. What concrete steps can we take to contribute to that collaborative effort towards ending human trafficking?
That's a great question. So look, first of all, as attorneys, people who are victims of human trafficking often have a myriad of legal problems in addition to the problems that are inflicted by being victims of crimes. Human traffickers are very, very good at picking up on vulnerabilities of victims. Very good. And when we free them from their traffickers, those problems they don't disappear. They're still with them. And we in law enforcement are good at lots of things, but I'll tell you one of the things we're sort of not so good at is touchy-feely stuff. We're trying to get better, but ask my office, it's not our strong point. And more than touchy-feely stuff, protecting the legal rights of victims, which is not touchy-feely stuff. Making sure that victims are having a place, having housing, and being represented in disputes with their landlord. Making sure they're on whatever public assistance that they need to be on. Making sure that they haven't been evicted from school because of some school-to-prison pipeline issue where a disciplinary problem's turned into a criminal problem. There's a host of different things that lawyers can do to help these victims. And I would encourage you to hook up with the organizations who are already working on this. Instead of, I call the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking, call the Legal Aid Society. We have one of the best legal aid societies in the United States in this city of Cleveland. And they need the help of the broader legal community continuously to increase their capacity.
Can states require people to take a course and be licensed in order to own a gun like they do for automobiles?
So that sounds like a law question. But it's law day, so I don't know. Look, the answer is I am not sure about what the legal restrictions on what states can and can't do. The Supreme Court has opined that there is a Second Amendment right to own a firearm. They have also opined in the Heller case that there is a reasonable role for states to play in imposing time, place, and manner restrictions on that right. And I am not versed enough in the technicalities of the follow-up opinions on that to tell you where the line is legally right now.
Sir, thank you. My question is regarding surveillance and the role that public surveillance played in helping the law enforcement in Boston, and how that also, though, impacts our privacy as public citizens. My question is, from the viewpoint of your office in law enforcement, do we need more public surveillance cameras, more places? And if we do, how should we also safeguard our rights as public citizens for some modicum of privacy?
The Boston case, most of the surveillance that was helpful in the Boston case, at least my understanding is, and I'm not working on it, so I don't know the super secret evidence, but it seems like most of the surveillance wasn't government surveillance, right? It was surveillance of stores that were nearby that had cameras up, or like everybody in this room has a camera. I mean, it used to be that people used to have to look around for somebody with a camera or say things like, God, I wish I had a camera to catch that. Everybody has a camera all the time. And my guess is the finish line of the Boston Marathon is a place where a lot of people have them out, right? So that's the first distinction, is a distinction between government surveillance and surveillance that is private surveillance. And that's really a community decision. There's not going to be a legal answer to that question. There's going to be a question about community mores, and a business owner may want very much to have good video surveillance outside his or her business because they're getting broken into. And I don't know that the government should be in the business of telling them they can't do it. And then if people are running around taking pictures at the end of the Boston Marathon and the FBI calls a press conference and says, give us your video, that you've already taken, that's a voluntary situation, right? People have a choice about whether they want to do it. Government surveillance, of course, is under our legal structure different. And we do have restrictions on what the government can and cannot do in terms of conducting surveillance, as we should in our society. I am not an expert in terms of the sort of the it's not even really Big Brother anymore. It's kind of like an extended family where we're all taking pictures of each other now. But it strikes me as that the legal framework of constitutional restrictions on the government is probably not the right legal structure to decide that question. And I don't know the answer of where that balance is, to be honest. Thanks.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to a Friday forum featuring Steve Dettelbach, U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Ohio. Thank you, Mr. Dettelbach. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
PNC is proud to support the presentation of this City Club of Cleveland Friday Forum on WVIZ PBS.
Additional support comes from Cleveland State University. Support for closed caption transcripts of City Club forums is provided by the Nordson Corporation Foundation.